Welcome to Joy, Passion, and Profit, where we empower entrepreneurs to build companies that change the world. We believe there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, and our goal is to provide you with insight and wisdom to bring your vision to reality. If you're committed to making an impact as well as making a profit, let us welcome you to Joy, Passion, and Profit. Hello, and welcome to the Joy, Passion, and Profit podcast, where the intention is to empower entrepreneurs to build companies that change the world. Contrary to what you may see in the media, it is my belief there has never been a better time to be alive on the planet than right now. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, there's never been a better time to launch a business than right now. And my intention with this podcast is to provide you with insights and inspiration that supports you in becoming the best entrepreneur you can possibly be. To do so, you might have to shift your mindset a little bit, because I believe being an entrepreneur should be an expression of your passion and creativity. You shouldn't have to be stressed out and overwhelmed while working 100 hours a week. Being an entrepreneur should be fun and exciting. It should be a way for you to share your unique gifts and talents with the world, while being handsomely compensated for your products and services. Of course, it will be challenging. But that's the beauty of it, because if it doesn't challenge you, it can't change you. So I'd like to challenge you to change your mindset in a way that helps you understand the importance of making a difference while making a profit. So my intention is to bring on guests who can empower you to build a company that changes the world while supporting you in reaching all of your financial goals. Joining me today is Charis Santillie, and she's a life balance and transition coach for high achievers. And she's also the host of the Charis Your Life podcast. So without further ado, let's welcome Charis to the podcast. Hello, Charis. How are you?
Hey, Michael. I'm thrilled to be here. Happy to be on board here. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So before we jump into your work, I'd like to start off with a few icebreakers. So first of all, tell us where you're from.
I am originally from Washington State, southeastern Washington, which is a lot of people have a misconception that Washington's all like Seattle with a lot of trees and mountains and stuff, and it's not. There's a big chunk of the state that is desert, flat, a lot of brown, a lot of sagebrush, its own kind of beauty, and that is where I'm from.
Interesting. I've never heard that before, because my first thought is green and trees, as you mentioned.
No, very different.
Now, tell us a little bit about your family, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
So I grew up basically as if I was an only child, because I have two brothers from my dad's prior marriage. They lived with their mom. And they're 7 and 10 years older than me. So I grew up, I'm my mom's only, and so my parents only together. And so I grew up and watched them build a business from scratch, basically pursue the American dream. And it was, an opportunity that was pretty remarkable. It was a beautiful childhood, and I was surrounded by them, watching them literally start in our kitchen and build this business and watching it grow. And I modeled after that and quickly saw hard work ethic, working extra hours and what's possible and all of those things. And I definitely modeled after them and went after all the accolades I could as a kid, especially in high school.
Sure. Now, you like movies?
I do.
Share one of your favorite movies.
One of them is Meet Joe Black.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it got necessarily the acclaim or best reviews, but I really, really loved it. And I think what I love about it is, it's the messages underneath all of it.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of the really seen in between the lines and the bigger messaging that was shared. And I thought Brad Pitt did a great job too. I really, quite an interesting character. And I love Anthony Hopkins. Did I get them? Yeah, those are the actors, right? Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting because I love movies, because to me, movies are just metaphors for life.
Mm-hmm.
Watching with an open heart and an open mind, movies can literally change our lives. I know I've had some movies that really transform how I see the world. And so I just absolutely love movies. So that's why I always throw that question in. Now, name a book that has had a powerful impact on your life.
Mm. Um, a recent one from the last few years is by Martha Beck, who is a famous coach. She is the coach who wrote a column in Oprah magazine for 20 years. And her latest book that was released, I think it was last year, is called The Way of Integrity.
Mm,
And she did this really interesting, like, shared her perspective of Dante's Inferno, like in this story, and in a personal development fashion, and like translating it in a certain way to have us understand. And it really, really beautiful. And I really loved the way she did that book. So that was pretty impactful.
nice. Now, there are some people who are pretty pessimistic about the future, while others are pretty optimistic about the future. So, where do you fall on that spectrum between optimism and pessimism for the future in general?
In general, I would say pretty optimistic, because I think that, well, and I also have been trying to practice a sense of neutrality to some degree too, because I think that life, in my experience, has been more enjoyable, especially for my nervous system and my literally how I feel, if I kind of am in this kind of neutral zone. I mean, the emotions fluctuate, of course, but there's a period in my life where I definitely reached really high peaks, really low valleys, and really, it was like very big roller coastery experience at times. And overall, I find that that is not sustainable, nor does it bring as much peace of mind as wanted to have, which I have much more of now. So there's a sense of kind of a neutrality and trying to catch myself when I even label things as really good or really bad. But overall, it's a sense of optimism around our future and such. And I do believe that we have certain, like you and I both have glasses on right now, like we each see the world through certain lenses, and we can continue to change that thanks to neuroplasticity and power that we have within ourselves. um, and so it's all about what are we bringing into our world, and therefore then that's gonna show us what we're seeing in the world. And I think we can really, it's not about completely ignoring the quote unquote bad stuff, but it's definitely, I do believe that we can curate our lives. So if you want to curate a more optimistic future, I believe that is possible. And I think that you need to be willing to do that. And then you need to, as as a coach, take a lot of action steps and do a lot of practicing of different types of things to make that happen.
Sure. So let's do a couple of sentence completions. Okay. I really love to.
Coach people who are hungry for the next, their next thing, their next something, whatever it is.
My superpower is.
That I am calming, and I'm really good at catching people's language when they phrase something a certain way, or a word comes out and it's a bit contradictory to something they just expressed. And kind of catching that, and being able to reflect back to them and tell them what they just said. And that's been, so both of those things, calming and catching a lot of language.
Okay. I am proud of.
Reframing my view of success.
Mm, the future is.
Right.
Now, I'd like you to introduce Charis the professional. So, in your own words, tell the audience what you do professionally.
So, as you said, life balance and transition coach. If we dissect that a little further, my coaching certification is I'm a certified fearless living coach, a certified fearless trainer, and a positive intelligence trainer. So and my core frameworks are fearless living and positive intelligence, and I weave them together in certain ways. Primary core one is fearless living, and life balance. Uh, as people have a perspective of what that is. However, to clarify, my perspective of balance is not as much about time management as it is about learning how to manage how we feel. So that I feel is actually, it's a lot about internal balance. And then the transition. So, and I kind of tend to coach people a couple different phases. One, kind of that midlife phase where they're realizing that, oh, chasing all the external stuff as a high achiever hasn't quite brought me to the feelings I'd like to feel more, consistently. Like I don't feel satisfied most of the time. So then having that realization and being ready to do some deeper work to realize, oh, this is kind of more an inside job.
Yeah.
And so I have a program called Busy to Balanced, and I do some work to help people. Again, it's a lot of inner work to figure out how we feel, and that may and manage that in a certain way. Um, and that may or may not lead to changes in their time and in their external life. And
Yeah.
then transition wise, I help people going through life transitions, either a chosen transitional thing that's more of in that inner transition, like that, or people a little later stage in their journey, exiting their business, moving on from one business to another, and or entering retirement. Because I have a lot of connections in the financial services world that have been connecting me with a lot of wonderful entrepreneurs who are facing these kinds of transitions. And the reality is, we've got this fantasy vision of what it's like to exit a business and move on to retirement or move on to the next thing. And the reality is that there's a bit of a honeymoon phase, and then it kind of slaps you upside the head if you haven't really done the work to separate out identity and passion from the business and the baby of the business that you birthed and created. So I've been doing a lot of work with that kind of client as well.
Interesting. Now, and we're going to jump into that a little bit more, actually,
Mhm.
in coaching segment. But I'm curious because I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that I believe there's never been a better time to become an entrepreneur. And again, I am an optimist. As a matter of fact, I'll go as far as to say I consider myself an irrepressible optimist. That's just the lens through which I see the world. So, what are your thoughts about that statement that there's never been a better time to become an entrepreneur?
I think so. I mean, I think it's like I'm looking outside my window right here. I've got all these beautiful oak trees on our property right outside my window. And there's that saying of the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The second best time is now, something like that. So it goes something like that. So I think that if you were to ask us this a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, I have a feeling you and I would probably say now. Like whatever the now is, I have a feeling we would both say now. Yeah, now's the best because A, it's connected with how you and I see the world. And B, I think it's just, I think it's where we are and I think it's where we're heading. And so I think I see the opportunity being there and becoming even more so as we move forward.
Mm. So you mentioned that your parents were entrepreneurs. And when did you get the entrepreneurial bug to start your own company?
So that was fresh. Let me think. When technically out of college, but now, yeah, well, now might be a good time to go into a little bit of the backstory there. If you want me to connect a few dots.
Let's do it. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So, um, I went off to college, came back after my freshman year. It was the summer I was turning 19, and we were celebrating my dad's 50th birthday with a hot air balloon ride. And it was a hot day in that desert area of Washington, but we did have a beautiful ride. However, something went horribly wrong when we came into land. And we ended up having a crash landing. And my father ended up rolling out of the basket, suffered a broken neck, and was paralyzed. And my mom and I, he was physically paralyzed, but my mom and I suffered what I would refer to now, looking back, as emotional paralysis. And I think that a lot of people experience that kind of paralysis at different stages of their life, whether or not they've had a big traumatic experience like we went through. I think that it's an easy coping. It's an easy way our whole system, our nervous system, will react to something uh, and help us get through. And so, what ended up happening for us is, as you can imagine, our whole lives turned upside down. And my mom turned to drinking to numb her pain. And she passed away about 10 years ago when that finally did her liver in. And then my dad, my coping mechanism was to amp up the ambition and the busyness. So I that kind of led into, okay, I finished college. I happened to meet my now husband within the year following the accident. We ended up getting married soon after college. And I immediately started I worked for a few years. The only time I've ever worked for anybody besides my parents or myself was a few years after college, for a lovely um, consulting company in San Francisco. And when he was in dental school. And then after that was when I launched myself, when we moved for his orthodontic residency. He's an orthodontist. Is when I made a decision to do some freelance work for this consulting company from afar, because we were moving to Indiana at that time. And then I always had art interests, and I'd started doing some PowerPoint presentations for them. And then I continued doing that, took some graphic design classes, and then became a graphic designer freelance. That was my first business on my own. He started bringing me home clients, and then I built up my freelance business. That eventually grew to a marketing boutique business, specifically in the dental and specifically in the orthodontic world. That eventually grew to a software development that we did for connected with marketing. And then along the way, there's a whole nother story of how the heck I got into coaching. But that was definitely, that's kind of the summary of the years of, well, when and how I got into being my own entrepreneur. And I definitely went a little like neck deep into workaholic and a lot of extra hours. And again, to keep myself busy and avoid feeling some feelings. Definitely.
Now, as an entrepreneur, I love seeing how people create logos to represent their companies. And you shared an interesting story about your logo, which you use an owl.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us why you chose the owl. Give us a little backstory about what that symbolizes.
Yeah. Well, and now that you know my prior life as a graphic designer, I created her, and I created my own logo, and have a whole background of doing all of that over the years. So it's pretty special for me. So I chose an owl because I've always loved animals, always loved birds too, especially. And an owl to me represents a lot of wonderful things. They can turn their heads almost all the way around. So their range of view is significant. They can see in the dark, which is fabulous. And they can also have that, bird's eye view and be able to get up above and see the broader picture. And to me, the owl is a perfect analogy. I mean, it's also connected to wisdom. It's a perfect analogy for a coach being a guide and helping people to see things that might be practically behind them, see things that might be in the dark or in the dark of shadows of some of their own stuff, and be able to get up higher and see the bird's eye view when the person is stuck down in the weeds. And so I think a great image. I just love it. We also have owls that we have around our property that we hear or have them come feed it, get water at our water trough that I have a trail camera there and get photos of. I have some on my website. We have an owl box that we've had some babies nests that have been birthed there and been able to watch them. And we can hear certain owls at night too, sometimes have them on our roof. So there's been a lot of special things. There's also a connection with my mother. We bought this house the year after she passed. And we quickly put up some bird boxes for swallows and bluebirds, and then also an owl box. And it's a screech owl box, Western screech owl. They don't screech though. They actually make this beautiful trilling sound. It's not a screech at all. And a couple years before we saw any action in there, but it was on Mother's Day evening that I was walking from our where we just had dinner, putting my plate to the kitchen counter, and first I literally just felt it was like a magnetic pull, kind of a message somehow inside of me that just was like, go look at the owl box. This was really strange. My husband saw me too, and afterwards said that was really weird behavior. It was unusual. I set the plate down. I go over to a certain window and look down, and it's dusk. It's getting dark. And I'm like, Dawn, we have an owl. It was the first time we'd had one.
Wow.
And this is Mother's Day evening, about 3 years after she passed, just a couple years after we moved into the house. And it was really remarkable. One of the most magical spiritual moments I've ever had, because I can't explain it any other way. And when I looked, I was like, this owl's looking up at me. I mean, it was really quite wild. And I grabbed binoculars quickly, and then we got to see her raise 2 chicks that year. I don't know if they're called chicks, owlets, I guess, owlets. Anyway, so yes, lots of wonderful connections with the owl. And I've named her Grace because my name actually means grace. It's a Greek word, and it actually means grace. So there you go.
Well, I'm a firm believer in divine synchronicities, and that definitely sounds like a divine synchronicity. No accident there that the owl showed up on Mother's Day. So that's a beautiful, beautiful story. But what I want to highlight though was how much thought and emphasis you put in your logo, and it's absolutely perfect for you and your business. From a coaching perspective, I love how you looked at the different parts of how an owl, shows up, and how we as entrepreneurs and people can use the coaching skills to do those things you're talking about, like C360 and all those types of things. I thought that was beautiful how you tied the owl's attributes to your coaching practice. I thought that was beautiful.
I've also came up with the tagline that I was able to get trademarked. Owl guide you. So that's fun too. Little, my marketing roots coming out.
Yeah, got it. Now, as a life coach myself, one thing I do with entrepreneurs is challenge them to focus on their personal development first before they focus on the mechanics of running a business. Now, obviously, you have to have some knowledge of how to run a business, but I believe what most entrepreneurs really struggle with is their own personal growth and development. And I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and it seems that you have sort of the same focus. You really challenge entrepreneurs to look within to figure out what it might be that's keeping them from being the best entrepreneur they can possibly be. And I want to focus on a couple of your podcasts that share some valuable insights for entrepreneurs, which really speaks to the idea of an entrepreneur investing in their personal growth and development. So the first one I want to talk about is you had a one called Your Magical 6-Month Question. Can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Yes. And I agree with you completely. I think that if I even look back at my own experience, I was so head down and just very graspy and going for things. I'd hear of an opportunity and I'd like, if I rewind and look at prior me, um, before I did a lot of personal work, and it is exhausting, didn't always get me where I wanted to go. And I wasn't really doing the things that were best for me. And that led to a lot of moments of burnout and multiple times health issues, mental health issues. I mean, as far as just not taking care of myself. So I absolutely agree with you. And um, so my magical 6 month question, um, there was, and I think of this often, but there was a very specific big question moment I had. Actually, it was when I was deciding. I don't think I go into all the details of the specifics in the episode, but it was when I was deciding around a big shift in my life and going into coaching full time, and that being my focus, and certain things I would need to leave to do that. And I finally just like popped in my head, okay, let's imagine I've got 6 months and I pop myself 6 months ahead. And let's just say that that's the end of the road for this human experience for me. Would I look back and regret one decision over the other? Would I regret making one decision, or would I not regret having not made the other? Like that was basically the way I looked at it. It's like, what would I think 6 months from now if that was it? And I looked back. What I love about 6 months is it makes it more applicable to how we're living our lives right now. Because when you start looking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, it's a little easier to give yourself a lot of wiggle room and think that, oh, well, there's time to have a lot of things change, and I'll get to this someday, and I'll do that, spend that more time with those people someday, and I'll do that travel someday, all the things that sometimes get put off. But 6 months, kind of like the rubber meets the road real fast, because that's soon, really.
Yeah.
So I that was powerful for me. It helped me take a leap, take care of myself, and shift a lot of things in my world. And I know that it's resonated with many people because I've heard about that. So I'm glad that that resonated with you too.
So how would you, okay, so people are watching this and you saying, okay, so I have this magical 6 month question. So for the audience, as they're watching this, what are they going to write down specifically to ask themselves that question?
Okay. So let's everybody think of one thing you're struggling with right now, and a decision that you're struggling with making. And I want you to think of that. And then I want you to right now write down, or just literally even think, imagine 6 months from now, and that's the end of your line in this human body. That's it. Which way would you regret having gone? Like, which is the better option? Which, that future self with no more life to live in 6 months, which decision would that person have wanted you to make?
Mm,
That's going to make things real fast of what you actually desire. And if you, whatever your religious or spiritual beliefs are, if you want to think of your higher self, your future self, your intuition, your spiritual, if you believe that you're a spiritual being or soul having a human experience, any of those beliefs or not can relate to this as well. And it just really removes a lot of the mental layers we put on things, the logic we try to apply to some of our decisions, that many times is going against what our heart and soul really want.
Yeah. And what I love about coaching is the challenge that we place in front of folks to become aware, because I believe awareness is the key to transformation. Because if I'm not aware of it, I can't change it. And so bringing awareness to certain thoughts, beliefs, ideas we may have, what as a coach, what I do is again bring the awareness to challenge the person to do the same within themselves. So let's look at you. So stop looking out there, look at you, and ask yourself that question. I think that's a really magical question. That's a really good question, because 6 months, like you said, it's if you really stop and think about it, it's like, whoa, okay, 6 months, I got it. For example, if you were to say, if I only have 6 months to live, what would I do?
Yeah.
So you just start
Yeah.
thinking, oh my gosh, I do this, blah, 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 blah. So that's a powerful question to get people to become aware of what they believe, how they feel, what they think. And that's a really good way to do that.
Yeah.
Now, another podcast I enjoyed was this one's really powerful, was the most important person in your life. Who might that be?
Yeah. So I start that off by asking. So I'm asking you, audience, right now, who is the most important person in your life? Think about it. And I'm curious who the first person, you always go with the first thing that pops in your mind, because that's usually the more honest, opinion inside of you. And my belief is that the most important person in your life should be, and actually is, you. Like, you are the most important person in your life. And some of you may have thought that, and some of you may not. If you did not think it, I want you to give it some serious thought. And if you did think it, I want you to challenge yourself and see, okay, you say you believe that. Are you living it? Because often we can say we believe something or we logically agree with it, but are you actually living it? And then that shows up in when you say no, and when you say yes, and when you say I don't know, and how you're living your day. And it's amazing how many times what we say are our priorities don't match how we actually live in our lives and how we act. So and I mean, I still work on all of this stuff. It's certainly I don't have it all figured out, and I won't even. It's going to continue to be a constant process of learning for me and adjusting and practicing myself. But I really challenge you to consider yourself to be the most important person in your life, and then become more aware, just like Michael said. Are you actually living that truly, like for real?
Yeah. Now, I know there's going to be some people who think to themselves, well, that's kind of selfish and arrogant and maybe narcissistic to think that I'm important. I know a lot of people will struggle with that idea, but I wholeheartedly agree with you 100%. But for those people out there who may have had that first thought of, ooh, that's selfish, that's arrogant, that's narcissistic, what's your message to them?
I think selfish has gotten a bad rap, unfortunately. Narcissism is a whole different thing. And I think, like to really study, like you have to really be a certain way to truly be a narcissist. So that's kind of its own category. But in general, I mean, there's the common thing we hear, like if you're in the airplane and put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I mean, that is an example we hear a lot. It applies here. So I would start there and just be like, let's just think about an emergency situation such as that. It makes sense, right? Like you've got to be able to breathe and be able to manage what you need to do to get that onto your elderly parent or your child or somebody else. And or even think of my father. I mean, he's paralyzed. Like in something like situation like that, yeah, I have to take care of myself real fast. I can do it, and then I can address him. But if I'm fumbling to try to figure him out and then I pass out, That's not going to help anything. So we've heard that analogy many times. So that's another one to remind us, and kind of an extreme situation. And then I, I, I just, when you aren't, if I'm sure we've all got people in our lives where you're like, God, they're exhausted, they're burnt out either on work or on running their kids around everywhere, every which way, just like constantly the complete people pleasing, just everybody comes first and they're like run ragged. And you can look at that person and be like, oh, yeah, they don't take care of themselves. Like, good grief. But then there's some people that you can think of where they've taken really great care of themselves, and then they still have these beautiful relationships. They're still responsible. They still can be successful business owners. They can still have amazing relationships. But you're like, how do they do it? Well, I'll tell you how they do it is that they take care of themselves, exquisite care of themselves, and they prioritize themselves. Because, and like, I can tell you, I spent a lot of years trying to, here's a simple example, trying to stay up late. I'm not a late bird, uh, or a night owl, even though there's the owl in my logo, but I am not a night owl as far as my sleeping schedule is concerned. I mean, even as a child in high school, I would fall asleep in gatherings with friends. I mean, we all just knew I'm going to fall asleep watching the movie, and then they'll wake me up at the end and then I'll go home. So that has been that way my whole life. But for many years with my husband, he's a night owl. I would try to stay up later to watch, to spend time with him. Just I could never quite it I can't sleep later if I stay up later. If it just does not work for me. So I finally was like, you know what? I got to go to bed early. I go to bed now between 8 and 9, 9:30 at the latest. But when I go to bed by 8:30, wow. And that's a lot of nights. That's like most of my nights. It's awesome. And I feel fantastic. And I am in such a better mood to be a loving wife and daughter and business owner. And I can be more present on my coaching calls. I can get a better workout in. And then if I need a nap, I'll go take one of those because, again, I'm not going to do anybody any good if I'm a little grumpy or I'm just not able to be fully coherent. And I need a lot of sleep. And I've finally accepted that. And I've determined this is my cycle. I'm better if I go to bed early. Give into it. It's okay. Embrace it. And there's one example, but it has made a world of difference. And
Yeah.
I think that I'm sure if people really started looking at their lives, they could see something like that for themselves as well. But start with something small. If it sounds, it's all the little things like that. Like, am I still super responsible? Yes. Am I still maybe doing more than I should for certain things and people? Possibly. And yet I'm constantly looking at how I can set up better boundaries for myself and take better care. And so, it's a lot of the little things. It's a
Yeah.
lot of little
I think
things.
a lot of entrepreneurs really struggle with, and actually not just entrepreneurs, but people in general, is what I'll call the lack of self-love.
Yes.
And again, I'm going to speak from personal experience. So early on in my career, in my life, I was the guy chasing money. And so I got my sense of self-worth by the things I accomplished, the stuff that I had, stuff like that. If you would have asked me about self-love or talked, I would have went, I don't need to talk about that stuff. I'm a go-getter. I'm a successful go-getter guy. But what I've come to know is that to be truly successful, you have to love yourself. Because if you don't, you're gonna create all these different defense mechanisms to try to make up for what you might think you're lacking. And so self-love, I love the quote that you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. And I truly believe that. To truly create connection and intimacy with someone begins with you having that same connection with yourself. And I know that that's something, and especially men. I work a lot with men, and that's like, whoa, don't give me that feeling stuff. But it's really the core, I believe, of success is self-love. Because when you get to that place of self-love, self-confidence, then you're unstoppable. You're absolutely unstoppable.
I agree with you. And I've actually been working with a lot of men, and uh th- there is that, and they've been coming to me at a stage where they're like, they've done some of that work. And so they like, I don't have to convince them. I don't even have to like open the door and show them like, look, this is the way. Like they do get it. And then some of them have done some of the work, and then but they know they have more layers to shed to be able to love themselves more fully. And a lot of that, sadly, I think, is our culture, society, especially around stereotypical gender norms and the way that we have functioned, that has created that to be a bit more challenging, and especially for men. And I'm so grateful that times have changed, that there are and are still changing, and that people like you and I are helping to, work with people, that we talk about it like this, and that um, mental health is being talked about and admired more than, maybe when you and I were kids. It was definitely not a common thing for people to seek therapy or talk about any of these things. It was very much behind closed doors, at least where I grew up. It certainly was. And I'm just so grateful that that has shifted, because it really is key. And years ago, there was a moment when somebody very intuitive told me, like, you basically just looked at me and said, you don't love yourself. Like, you really actually don't, not as much as you think you do. And I was like, it felt like a knife in like, it was like, it struck me as true at the time, which was shocking, because if you'd asked me, like, logically, did I think I did, I would have said yes. But it was the reality that person saw into me, said it at the right time and in a tone where it hit. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got some work to do, don't I?
Yeah.
Dang.
Well, again, my primary focus has been the changing roles of manhood and masculinity in society, and I've written several books in that. And I wrote a book called A New Conversation with Men. And in that book, I identified what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And the very first illusion is, to be a man, you must be non emotional and disconnected. Because we live in a culture and society that has conditioned men to believe that feelings are for women. And we as men should not express vulnerability, sensitivity, things like that. And as you mentioned, I'm an optimist. And I remember when I started writing about this stuff 25 years ago, I mean, it was like I was attacked by men for even talking about feelings, talking about, one guy made a comment. He says, yeah, you're talking about the pussification of men. I don't like it. And I'm just talking about men getting in touch with their emotions. And self-love can occur if you're not in touch with your emotions and being in touch with who you are as a human being. And it's really the struggle or the challenge that I've had getting men to talk about this stuff. But again, the good news is more and more men are becoming open. I look at the men's coaches that I see now and I interact with. There's a lot more men that are doing this work. And again, as I look over the last 25 years, I see a really positive shift in men's attitudes about emotional things and personal transformation in general. So I'm really optimistic about that. Now,
Agreed.
I'm a huge fan of Abraham Hicks. And you shared some great insights based on a lesson called "Get ready to be ready to be ready to be ready." And I love just saying that. So first of all, I'm curious, how were you introduced to Abraham, and how long have you been following your work?
Yeah. So I feel like it's mainly been this last year ish, give or take. And I don't know. I think it was one of those, like, happened upon YouTube type of moment. And not that I do a lot of looking things on YouTube, but I think that's what it was. So yes, that is a common phrase of getting ready to be ready to be ready. And the way it came up that day that inspired the podcast was around, I think it was around somebody realizing they needed to have a conversation with someone, but they weren't quite ready. And Abraham said, well, you're like, kind of like gave him permission, kind of made it okay. Like, well, yeah, you've been, and you still are getting ready to be ready to be ready to be ready to like, to do that, have that conversation. Because just because you know that that would help you, and you know that something that quote unquote needs to happen, or it doesn't mean that you as this human are ready to open your mouth and say the words. And so it's like giving yourself permission. And it reminded me at that time when I listened to that specific episode where it was in that specific context and the whole thing, it just kind of was like ding, ding, ding. It resonated with me around something that I'd just gone through regarding a conversation that I had finally had with someone that I'd put off for a long time. And I remembered people close to me where I would share some of the thoughts around it before I had the conversation. It would just be like, well, why don't you just say what you just said to me, to that person? And I was like, I had a visceral body reaction inside me of truly not being ready. And then one day I was,
Mm.
and I was very empowered that day, not in a like powerful, cocky, like, my way or the highway type of thing, but I was able to stand in my power, speak what I needed to say, also be kind, and set some very clear boundaries. And then when I heard this, it kind of just reminded me to not beat myself up that it took me a while. I mean, and as a coach too, it's like, we all, I think, especially high achievers and entrepreneurs, and then as a coach as well, it's like a lot of standards. It's like, well, you know, I know I should be able to do this thing. I know how to do this thing. Da, 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 da. But if you're not ready, you're not ready, and it's okay.
Yeah,
And so give yourself a break. I think there's a big part of our lives that is learning how to give ourselves breaks.
absolutely. And so as you're watching this, if you're not familiar with Abraham Hicks, do yourself a favor, go to YouTube and just Google Abraham Hicks. I'm not going to tell you anything other than they're spiritual teachers. Let's just leave it at that. But go to the YouTube, do Abraham Hicks, and I'm sure you will find or run into whatever you need to hear that day. So just,
I love that.
check them out. They're really great.
Yep.
Now, we were talking about self-love. And one thing that I know some people deal with is imposter syndrome. My belief is that imposter syndrome is driven by a lack of self-love. So, what are your thoughts on dealing with and moving past imposter syndrome?
Mm. Yes, I think, again, it's kind of that not beating yourself up. It's in that vein. It's in the be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself. And it's connected with usually comparisonitis. And it is really, I like the way, I don't know who's talked about it this way, but I've heard it multiple times talked about as like, you're not an imposter being this thing that you're not ready to be. You're a beginner.
Hmm.
So can you just give yourself a break? Because you're just a beginner. If you're feeling imposter syndrome, it's usually because you're doing something that you're not as good at yet as you would like to be.
Yeah.
And you're comparing yourself to someone who's been doing it longer than you, or just had a supposedly smoother ride to get to some way of being that appears to you to be, where you would like to be, or somehow superior to, or better than you. And really, usually it just means, in the reframe, I love a good reframe, is to look at it like, you're not an imposter, you're just a beginner. Like, seriously, if you were to, or if anybody has children, like somebody learning to play the piano or tie their shoelaces. I mean, would you call them an imposter because, and that they suck for some reason, like how we tell ourselves in our head, because they can't figure it out on the first go, if nobody's really taught them how to do it and they're just doing their best? I mean, it takes practice, it takes some guidance, it takes somebody helping them or them learning from someone to do anything.
Yes.
So, and especially to do something well. I mean, even the savants, it's not like they came out of the womb and could suddenly play the piano. I mean, there was something that happened to click some things into place to get them to the moment. And so I think that it goes back to giving yourself a break and then reminding yourself, what if you're just a beginner at this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we begin to wind down, I'm going to talk about your free on-demand training that you deserve to go from busy to balanced. But before we do, I want to give you an opportunity, first of all, as you're watching this, if you're inspired or moved by what Charis has shared, I want to give her an opportunity now. How can people find you? Let's get that out of the way now. How can people find you if they're interested in working with you?
So I know my name's unique. Michael's done a great job of pronouncing it. It's like the city Paris, but with a CH. That's how you spell it and say it. I'm sure he'll have some note below. But my website and my socials, everything is, and the podcast name, it's all Charis Your Life. That's my tag and my site and my podcast name. And so you can find me that way. And then yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about what you mentioned to the training.
And there will be a link below. Look down in the comments section or in the body of the YouTube channel. You'll see a link to her site also. So you don't have to memorize it. So it's there below. All right. So you have an offer of a free on-demand training. And I love what you said. You deserve to go from busy to balance. And I think so many times we get so caught up in busy, especially as entrepreneurs. I know I'm terrible at it because I have so many creative ideas. It's like I go from writing books to doing podcasts, doing TV shows, so there's all this stuff going on. And now it's about, okay, creating that balance because I do believe you can't have it all, however you define all. You can have it all, but we need that balance. So I want to talk a little bit about your program, your video training, how to live life on your own terms and timeline. And you shared 3 secrets. And I'm going to share the secrets, and I just wanted to kind of touch bases as we wind down here. Okay, so the secret number one is how becoming your best self is not as complicated as you may think. Secret number 2, how living a happier life, even when you're busy, doesn't have to take hours out of your day. And secret number 3, a simple way to know when you need support and guidance. Now, all of these are in her free online training video, which you'll get when you go to her website. But Charis, just take a moment and just kind of give us the Cliff Note versions of that program.
Okay. Yeah. So it's this is and if you want to, you'll see it prompted on the site, but it's also charisyourlife.com/video to jump there. And in it, in addition to going in these secrets, I actually go into a few coaching exercises. So there's some really great meat to this training and inside the secrets. So it's not, I think that some people will venture into some personal development and then they get a little intimidated. It's also one of those situations of the more you know, the more you don't know. One of those things that happens. So then we start learning more about ourselves and about all this stuff. And then we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to unravel. And you go through a phase 2 where you kind of feel like you're a flipping wreck. And it's kind of like that things get messier before they get cleaner moment. So it can be really easy to feel like things are complex. And if you're, and then we're just inundated by information. If online, they get to know you're looking into any of these things, and then you got a zillion things popping up at your face. Uh, you know, of all these solutions and people to follow and all this stuff. So I think that it can become overwhelming really fast. And the latest book to read. I mean, like I was in a habit of, with my Audible subscription buying things. And then I was like, I have a backlog. So then I stopped, I put my subscription on hold and I'm like, okay, slow your roll, Charis. You need to like this is way out of whack. And that's okay. And let's start adding things to the wish list. That's where they're gonna go now. We don't need to buy 30 more books that you need to read right now. So anyway, it can be overwhelming. And I think it's really great to like get some reminders that I give you that are some simple things of how to just streamline and not be overwhelmed by all the possibilities. Cause there's so many, and then you're hearing about all these modalities and things and you're like, oh, I could do this. So I could do that. And it's great. And I say, go for it, try a lot of stuff, but just take a deep breath, slow down a little bit. And it doesn't have to be that overwhelming. And then, yes, it does not have to take hours out of your day either. A lot of people are big fans of certain types of rituals and things. And I have certain things that I go through myself too, but it, it I think that sometimes what stops us is that we make things more complicated than they need to be. Myself included, I'm raising my hand proud and strong here that I have done that a zillion times in my life. And I will continue to do it as a knee-jerk reaction that usually happens around certain things in my life. And then thank goodness I catch myself so I don't go down those paths. And I realize, Charis, you're making this a lot more complicated than it needs to be. This doesn't need to be hours of the day. You don't need to read 30 books right now. I mean, it's okay. So there's some things around that. And then my third secret was around, oh yeah, figuring out when you need support. So for me, I'll tell a very quick story. I had done therapy for many years by the time I was introduced to coaching. So I was introduced to coaching about 11 years ago. I was at a business event and I had just launched a software product and it was a very successful launch. And I was like trying to figure out why I didn't feel the way I thought I should feel. I felt like I should have been on cloud nine, but I wasn't. And I was at this business event and I was just networking and chatting with someone and that like, how you do, you meet strangers and you start talking because that's the point of a lot of that time. And I end up telling this gentleman my story, the family story about the accident. And it came up in such a way that it was charged. Like there was, the difference when somebody's telling you about something and it's like the scar versus the wound. Well, it had been reopened apparently. And I didn't even realize it because it was nearly 20 years. And I caught myself telling him a story. He looks at me and he says, he chose his words very serendipitously. First of all, his name was the same name as my father. And then he says to me, Charis, yeah, your dad's been paralyzed for nearly 20 years. Why are you paralyzed?
Wow. Wow.
Talk about a coaching moment, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't even a coach, but that came through him. I was like cracked open. The rest of the night was a little bit of a blur. And I ended up oversleeping the next morning, missed the keynote, turned out to be a coach. I heard she had this amazing keynote. She has this amazing story with this very traumatic family thing that happened to her. I found her later in the day. Beeline for her, was like, I heard great things. I missed it. I'm sorry. Can you fill me in? And she told me very quickly about her story and her background. And I was like, oh my God, maybe she can help me and fix me because I don't know what's wrong, but something's up because I just like burst into tears. And I started working with her as a private client and then as in her groups and different things. And she was actually the founder of Fearless Living that I talked about earlier. Eventually became a coach, decided to become a coach myself, but it was one of those moments where I was like, it just was very clear. And there's that saying too, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Yeah. And so I was ready to hear something really got broken open. And then I was like, okay, I don't know what is going on. I don't know how it's going to get fixed, but this feels good. And so I clearly need some help because my life is not feeling the way I would like it to. So that was my pivotal moment. Not that anybody has to have something very striking,
Yeah.
but the fact of learning how to trust yourself and listen to these moments, when you know you want your life to change and you want to feel better more of the time. And maybe you feel like you should be feeling differently than you are, but you aren't. Don't be afraid to get help. Heck, I'm sure you have your own coach. I mean, coaches need coaches too. Like this, this is this whole experience is um not one for the faint of heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I am obsessed with personal development. That's just me. I just love, for me, I have to tie it into my spirituality. And what I mean by that is, I believe every human being has a divine purpose. And we all have unique gifts and talents. And our way of being in service to the universe is by sharing those gifts and talents. And so for me, writing and speaking is what drives me. It's what brings me aliveness and joy and passion and all of that. And so because of my passion and commitment to this personal development stuff, what I like to do is share things with others to not necessarily have them do what I'm doing, but just to find the joy in their lives. And it's really that simple. Help people find the joy in their lives. And so, again, there are a gazillion coaches, a gazillion books. There's so many programs out there for you. My intention is to provide you with some insights to support you in getting to your joy. And I love the way Charis brings it about. She's got a really, I'll use the term simple, because that's what it is. It's simple, but not easy. Simple, but not easy. So if you're interested, if you're stuck and you're looking for ways to maybe get unstuck, I think she's a great resource. So I'll have her link posted below. Check her out. Give her a call. See if that works. Now, Charis, I want to give you an opportunity now for your final closing thoughts, whatever's on your heart to share with the audience.
Oh, I so appreciate that. And yeah, it's like, if I resonated with you, I
Yeah,
either did or
exactly.
I didn't. I either
Yeah.
did or I didn't. And, that's fine. So if I did, check out my podcast like Michael did. I mean, that's how I got here today. We met in a networking event and he was a little intrigued and then checked out the podcast and then sent me a message and here I am. So, that's one way to do it, or jump on a call with me. But no matter what you do something. If you don't have support right now, maybe if you're listening to this, then you're a fan of Michael's. I'm sure you could consider how he can support you. And if for some reason neither of us are the cup of tea for the moment, for some reason, get help somewhere, please.
Yeah.
Because if it is just so important. And maybe that help looks like continuing to listen to podcasts, reading his books, listening to my podcast. Like, what, just keep doing some of these things because that's part of the self-love.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 Well, Charis, again, thank you so much for spending an hour with us here on the Joy, Passion, and Profit podcast. And once again, that's the whole intention of the podcast, is to get people to joy, passion, and purpose. That's why I do what I do. I want everybody to have the experience of knowing what it feels like to be on purpose, to find their passions, to be able to give back in some way. And that's what drives me. So those of you who are watching and you tuning into the podcast, just know that I love you. And I'm simply wanting to share wisdom. So soak it in. We'll see you next episode. Take care.